People always talk about the American dream, the white picket fence and the manicured lawn, but they never tell you about the tiny dictators who come with the property deed, and I learned that the hard way when I moved into Oak Creek Estates. My name is Elias Thorne, and for 15 years I've worn a star on my chest as a county sheriff, a job that teaches you a lot about the darkest corners of human nature, though I never expected to find that kind of darkness lurking behind a neighborhood welcoming committee. I didn't move to Oak Creek for the prestige or the community pool. Honestly, I was there because the precinct needed a ghost, someone on the inside to watch a series of high-end surgical robberies that were gutting the local zip code. So I kept my head down, no patrol car in the driveway, no uniform on the porch, just a guy in flannels working on his vintage Mustang in a closed garage. The trouble started about 3 weeks in when I met Martha Vance, the kind of woman who treats a clipboard like a scepter and an HOA presidency, like she's presiding over the Supreme Court. She knocked on my door at 8 a.m. on a Saturday, not with cookies, but with a frown, asking why my trash cans were visible from the street for an extra 20 minutes past pickup, and why I didn't in Oppos. T seemed to have a, standardized, career path that fit the neighborhood profile. I gave her a polite, non-committal shrug, the kind you get suspect when you're waiting for them to trip over their own lie, and I watched her eyes narrow, realizing right then that I was a puzzle piece she couldn't into Oppos. T-force into her perfect little box. A month later, Martha pulled her master move at the community meeting, standing up there in her pastel suit, tapping a pen against the podium like a gavel, and announcing a brand new, safety and transparency, ordinance. She looked right at me and said, effective immediately, all residents must keep their garage doors open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. to ensure no illicit activities are being shielded from view, And the room went dead silent because everyone knew she was talking about me. I stood up, hands in my pockets, and asked her as calmly as I could where the hell she found a legal authority to demand access to the interior of a private residence. And she just smiled that thin, refrigerated smile, telling me that if I had nothing to hide, I should have no objection to, community visibility, I told her right there, in front of everyone, that my garage was part of my home, a constitutional sanctuary, and that forcing people to display their belongings was basically a shopping catalog for the very burglars we were supposed to be stopping. But she just scribbled my name down on a, non-compliance, list. For the next 3 weeks, my mailbox was a graveyard of yellow slips, fines for, obstructing view, suspicious concealment, non-neighborly conduct, and I could see her watching from her window every time I drove home, her shadow etched against the blinds like a vulture waiting for something to die. Then came last Tuesday, a day that started with a weird feeling in my gut, the kind of professional intuition that tells you the air is about to break. So I came home 3 hours early, parked a block away, and slipped in through my back fence. I was sitting in the back of my garage, the lights off, just me and a wrench and the quiet hum of the neighborhood, when I heard the distinct metallic slide of a Jimmy bar hitting my side door latch. Someone wasn't in Oppos, T just knocking. They were breaking in, moving with this arrogant, heavy-footed confidence that said they thought they owned the place, and I watched as the door creaked open, admitting a man in a tactical vest with, HOA security, plastered across the back in cheap, iron-on letters. He didn't in Oppos. T see me in the shadows. He just started walking around my tools, snapping photos of my workbench, muttering into a radio about, evidence of unauthorized mechanical work, and I realized Martha hadn't into Oppos. T just sent a goon, she into Oppos, D sent a scout. I stepped out from behind the Mustang, my service weapon drawn, and leveled its center mass before he could even blink, and the cold, mechanical click of his safety coming off sounded like a thunderclap in that small space. Don and Oppos, T move a muscle, I said, my voice dropping into that low, jag register I use for high-risk warrants, and I watched the bravado leak out of him so fast his knees actually shook, his hands flying up like he was reaching for the ceiling. Whoa, hey, you can in Oppos, T do this, he stammered, his eyes darting toward the gun, I and Oppos. And with the board, Martha authorized an interior compliance check because of your repeated violations, I took a step forward, the light finally hitting my face, and I told him, end quote. You and Oppos. Re not on the board right now, son, you and Oppos. Re in the middle of felony home invasion of an occupied dwelling, and I'm the guy who decides if you leave here in a seat or a bag. End quote. He tried to play the end quote. Community safety, end quote. Card, telling me I was the one who looked like a criminal for hiding away, but then I reached into my pocket and flipped open the heavy leather wallet, letting the gold of my sheriff's star catch the dim light. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, as he stared at that badge and realized he hadn't into Oppos. T just broken into A and quote. Suspicious neighbor in Oppos. S and quote. House. He and Oppos. D broken into the home of the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the county. I didn't in Oppos. T even used my phone. I just keyed the radio on my belt, calling for immediate backup for a burglary in progress with a detained suspect, and the look of pure, unadulterated terror on his face was the most honest thing I and Oppos. D seen in Oak Creek. Minutes later, the neighborhood was a sea of strobing red and blue lights. And here comes Martha, power walking down the sidewalk in her silk robe, screaming about, end quote, police harassment, end quote, and how her, end quote, security consultant, end quote, was just doing his job. She stopped dead when she saw me standing on my driveway, leaning against my car while my deputies cuffed her, end quote, consultant, end quote, on the concrete, and she actually had the nerve to tell the arresting officer that I was, end quote, interfering with an official HOA investigation, end quote. I walked up to her real close so she could see the lack of humor in my eyes, and I told her that in the real world, end quote, investigations, end quote, require warrants and, end quote, security consultants, end quote, who break into houses are just called inmates. It turned out, once we got a warrant for Martha and Oppos' house, we didn't in Oppos. T just find HOA records. We found a ledger of, end quote, fines, end quote. She'd been pocketing thousands of dollars in, end quote, compliance fees, end quote, that never hit the neighborhood bank account, and even emails to her goon telling him to, end quote, find something, end quote, in my garage she could use to force me out. The guy in the vest took a plea deal for 3 years, singing like a canary about how Martha had been using him as her personal muscle for years to intimidate anyone who dared to question her little suburban empire. Martha? She didn't in Oppos. To get off so easy. The judge was a guy who took the Fourth Amendment very personally, and he handed her a 10-year sentence for conspiracy, burglary, and extortion, making sure she and Oppos never hold a clipboard again for the rest of her life. The neighborhood is quiet now, the, end quote, garage door rule, end quote, is a dark joke of the past, and people actually wave when I drive by, but it makes you wonder about the person living next door to you, the one who's a little too interested in your business and a little too eager to enforce the, end quote, rules, end quote. We like to think our homes are our castles, but sometimes the people guarding the gate are the ones you need to worry about most, and I still keep my garage door closed, not because I have secrets, but because a man's home should be the one place where the world can and Oppos just walk in. So, tell me, have you ever dealt with a neighbor or an HOA that thought the law didn't and Oppos apply to them? Or do you think Martha was just an extreme case of, end quote, community spirit, end quote, gone wrong? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments, because sometimes the best way to keep a neighborhood safe is to make sure the people in charge aren't and Oppos the biggest criminals of all.